Everyone, welcome. We are digging into God's Word today. We're going to start with a question. I think everybody wants to be a helper, but what do you do when you don't know how to help? There's situations that happen all the time that I think our heart goes out to it and we desire to do something to help, but we don't know what to do. All right, and there's always needs that can be met, but a lot of times there's some that we see like, okay, that's easy. I can do that. I can help with that. I can do this one thing and that helps. I can take this step and it helps. But others seem so big that they exceed our abilities, and we're left wondering, what can I really do? And like we can look at a physical need and say, okay, that's an easy thing. Now that person needs water, right? I can give them a bottle of water, or there's this thing happened and I can show up and do this and that will help that physical need. And physical is easy to see, even if they're big and kind of past what we think we can do, they're easy to notice. But spiritual needs are not as obvious, but they're just as vital. And we're going to look at a story today where there's a massive physical need, and Jesus shows how we can be a part of fixing that and helping that. And also, even the bigger picture of the physical need leads us to the ability to meet a spiritual need as well. So we're going to dig in. We're in John chapter 6. And the question we want to be pondering as we look at this, how can I help? How can you and I help? And what need do we meet first? So John chapter 6, we're going to be in verse 4 to start with. And we're going to walk through this story and look at when Jesus feeds 5,000 and more than that even. Like there's 5,000 men there, but more than that, their families are there too. He feeds 5,000 people through a miracle. And so we're going to look at that today. Grab your Bible, join me, and let's get started. Verse 4 says, "Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, 'Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?' He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, 'There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?' Jesus said, 'Have the people sit down.' Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, about 5,000 in number." All right, so there's this huge crowd that had come to listen to Jesus teach. All right, and they spent the whole day listening to him, and like it must have been an awesome thing to be a part of, because thousands of people stay the entire day to listen. But it comes to dinner time, right? And it's the time for Passover, a very important feast for the Jews, and it's a meal that like you don't just skip, right? Like there's times where it's like, man, I'm busy. There's things that are going on. I'm hungry, but I'm going to wait till later. Like this is not something you skip. It's something that's so important to them in their culture. And so Jesus has this chance where he can, right? We know he does miracles, right? We know that he can do these things, and his disciples had even seen this. But Jesus, right? He's looking to test his disciples, and he asks them, "What are we going to do to feed these people?" And there's 2 of them, Philip and Andrew, that respond. Like, and we're not picking on these guys for their response. At least they responded. Like the other guys just sat there quiet and just hoped that someone else would answer. All right. So Philip basically says, "Hey, this has cost way too much. 200 denarii, like a year's wages wouldn't even buy enough food for everybody to have a bite." He said, "There's so many people here. Even if we had an entire year's worth of wages on me right now, and I went and bought food, it wouldn't be enough to feed these people." All right? It's just, hey, that this would cost me or us too much. There's no way we can do it. Andrew, all right, almost a little step further, right? Hey, he went and he found a boy that had food. He at least put forth some sort of effort. And he finds this boy that has this little bit of food. And he says, "Look, hey, we looked and all we found was a small amount. It won't make a difference. So I don't know what we're going to do." And two very similar sort of answers of, hey, there's nothing we can do. One was because, hey, I don't have enough resources. The other one was, I looked, but what I have is not that much, so why even try? Jesus does something really interesting here. Right? Because he even says that he did this to test his disciples because he knew what he was going to do. But he's always teaching. The question is, are we always learning? Are we always ready to learn from what he's doing? So the first response, this would cost too much. The second response, what I have, even if I'm willing to give it, won't make a difference, so why try? And I think a lot of times we use one of those 2 answers. That's a response a lot of times when there's a need. We either, man, it's so big, what could I possibly do? Or, man, what I have, like the resources I have, wouldn't even put a dent, so why should I even make an effort? Or at least I can help me. Right? Jesus is going to show us that's not the answer. And so there's a couple things we have to keep in mind. One, Jesus could have fed these people right away just by speaking the food into existence. He could have thought about it and did a miracle, and it happened. Like, they're on this hillside, there's nothing in sight. It's not like people can just run over to Wendy's and grab like something. But if Jesus wanted to, he could have made a bread cart appear right there, and everyone would have had stuff. He could have had, like we see in the Old Testament, food literally fall from heaven for the people to gather and pick up and eat. Like, it is not that Jesus doesn't have the power to do what he's doing, though. All right, he's doing something for his disciples. And it seems kind of weird, like, hey, he's asking them to do something that they can't do, but he's showing them this amazing thing he's about to do and inviting them to be a part of the change that he wants to do in the world, of being the difference in the world. He invited them to join him, right? He invites them to be a part of his mission. And so the question you and I need to ponder, right, what you and I need to think about is, what if God wants to answer the need in someone's life or in the world using you? Are you ready? Are you willing? Or will you give one of the answers of, the need's so great, even if I had a ton, I couldn't put a dent in this. Or, man, this is what I have, but I just don't have enough. And God, what could you possibly do through me? I have so little. But what Jesus does is amazing, and it's a lesson for you and I as well. Let's continue on, verse 11. So they sit the people down. They find this little boy that has basically a Happy Meal, right? He's got, it says 5 loaves and 2 fish, but as we will see, 5 loaves, it doesn't mean he's got like a loaf of bread that you would find at like Schnucks or something. Like, this is almost kind of more of it's a roll from Texas Roadhouse. Like, they're kind of like biscuits, right? These little tiny things that mom just threw 4 or 5 in for his lunch, and then a couple fish. And these aren't like, hey, he's got a massive tuna he's carrying around. Like, this is like some sardines. There's like a small fish. It's a snack. And so that's what this is. So keep that in mind as we continue on. In verse 11, it says this. It says, Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost. So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this is indeed the prophet who has come into the world. All right, it's an amazing moment here. All right, and we can't miss what happens, right? There's this 5 loaves and 2 fish. This is literally like the lunch of the poor people. This is, and not to be mean or disparaging, but that's just what it is. Like, this is, hey, if you could barely scrape by, this is what you kind of had for lunch. There's a couple biscuits and a few tiny measly fish, just enough so that your stomach would not be grumbling the entire day. It's biscuits, not a full loaf. It's a small snack. And don't overlook what this little boy does. Right? You have a little boy, a poor boy, who his stomach is probably grumbling. He has been there the whole day. He has lunch. His mom packed him. And it's just enough to hold him over until he can go to sleep without his stomach grumbling and hurting. And he gives it to Jesus, and he puts the disciples to shame, right? You have Philip and Andrew both say, hey, there's nothing we can do. Like, you have Andrew, who, I don't know what this guy's thinking is, like, I took this little boy's lunch, but it wouldn't feed everybody. Like, well, why did you take the little boy's lunch? But the little boy has given his lunch. And it's almost as if he understands something that the disciples don't. And we see throughout the Bible that God talks about that the faith of a child, if you just have the faith of a child, and I think there's a picture of it here where this little boy willingly gives his lunch to Jesus and says, hey, it isn't much, but I know that I'm giving it to you. And Andrew and Philip look so much at the logistics, they look so much at the obstacles that they forgot about Jesus. And for you and I, do we ever get so wrapped up in being logical and the details of things that we forget about Jesus is the one that has given us an opportunity. What could he do with what I can give? And so this little boy gives willingly what he had, and Jesus breaks the food into pieces. Like, he is doing the Passover meal with the people. And it's a great picture, a side note of that, hey, that following Jesus and like participating in what he's doing in the world is not something reserved for the well-off or the wealthy. Like, he uses the meal of a poor little boy and invites people to participate in following him. And so it's an amazing picture there. But he breaks the food into pieces, and he gives it to the disciples for them to pass out to these thousands of people. And I can imagine that the disciples are grumbling and complaining like, Jesus, what are we doing? This isn't going to work. Like, even if you break these into the tiniest little bites, we're not going to even put a dent in this. And he feeds everyone there. And there's 12 baskets of food left over. Everyone gets enough. And in fact, there's more left over afterwards than what they had. They filled 12 baskets. And these aren't like, hey, little baskets. We're talking big baskets to carry things in. This little boy brings his lunch, and at the end, after it feeds thousands and thousands and thousands of people, they have 12 basketfuls of food left over. There's a couple things that we can learn in this story. Number one, Jesus could have given them the huge baskets at the very start, and it would have still been a miracle. Jesus could have taken this boy's lunch, separated it, and it been 12 baskets full, 50 baskets full, 1,000,000 baskets full of food, and it would have been amazing, and the disciples could have passed it out, and it would have been just as much of a miracle, just as much as the power of God showing up there. But he didn't, right? And I think it's because he wanted the disciples to act on faith, that they have this small handful of food. It almost seems like they're holding some breadcrumbs and some pieces of a sardine and walking around people and handing it out and expecting at any moment that the last bit's going to be gone before they even put a dent in this crowd. But somehow it's still there. Somehow they give some to someone, and then they go to the next person, and it's not gone, and they keep going. And after 100 or so people, their mind is blown by how this is happening, but it continues to happen after thousands and thousands of people are fed. And then Jesus blows their mind even more, right? And he says, hey, go get the leftovers, right? And their mind's going to be swirling. Like, how is this happening? Like, how is he doing this? But he doesn't give it to them all at the start because he wants them to act on faith, trusting in him with each person that he would make it enough. But that's not the easy thing, right? The easy thing is, God, give me everything I need to do this now, and I will trust you in it. But your trust grows so much more if it's, God, I'm going to take the one step you put ahead of me. And I'm going to trust you that you'll give me what I need for the next step. And they go to person after person after person, and he provides over and over and over again, and provides more than they could imagine to where there's leftovers. And you look at the little boy too. So we see that Jesus could have given the huge basket of food, but he didn't, because he wanted them to act on faith. The little boy, right? He gave what he had. And what can we learn from that? That whatever you and I have, however great or small we think it is, if we put it into the hands of Jesus, it will always be enough. And if we're willing to give whatever we have over to Jesus, he will use it perfectly to accomplish what he wants to. And it will always be enough. In fact, it'll always be more than enough, right? Because when you give over all you have to Jesus, you always end up with more than what you started with. And that's not hey, if you tithe, give Jesus $10, you'll get $50 back. It is this idea of whatever you have been given by God, and he's given you exactly what you need to accomplish what he wants to in the world if you'll trust him and put it in his hands. And just like this little boy who gave a small little bit of lunch, I can imagine, maybe they gave him a basket of food to take home, and he goes home, and he's like, hey, Mom, where do you want me to put the leftovers? And his mom's like, I gave you barely enough to keep you alive. It's what we had. What are you talking about the leftovers? It's like, well, there's this guy named Jesus, and he just took my lunch, fed thousands of people with it, and they had this much left over. Well, actually, it was 12 times this, but they gave me a basket to bring home. How crazy is that? That whatever we give to Jesus is always used for greater things, but there's always more left over, and we always get more because we get to be used by Jesus, and our faith is built and grown. Think of that little boy. And the next time he had that lunch, I guarantee you he thought about what Jesus had done. It's a gift that you cannot get if he wasn't willing to give everything he had to Jesus to start with. When you give everything you have to Jesus, you always end up with more than what you started with. Let's move on. Let's jump ahead in the story a little bit. In John chapter 6, let's go to verse 26, all right, where Jesus is kind of teaching a lesson on this, and he's kind of people with questions, and he says this. He says, Jesus answered them, truly, truly, I say to you, you are seeking me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give to you. For on him God the Father has set his seal. And so you have people that they've experienced a miracle. They have had their bellies filled by Jesus doing a miracle. And Jesus said, hey, you're following me not because you believe necessarily because you have faith in my power. You've experienced a physical need met, and that's why you're following me. You say, man, you met that need. And you say, but don't forget, you have a greater need too. You need to hunger for the spiritual things. You need to have that need met as well, right? And Jesus is reminding them to not be focused only on the physical needs, that you have a greater need. And to his disciples, right? Don't just meet physical needs and neglect the spiritual need that exists. Because if you do that, if you fill a physical need but neglect the spiritual, you're still failing to help. And the reverse also works too. And I think as Christians, we have a hard time with this one. Like, we will go and share the gospel with somebody. But if they have a physical need that we can meet, why are we not doing that too? Like, Jesus met both. To just feed someone but not give them the gospel, that neglects to help them. But to share the gospel and to ignore a need they have also just like neglects what Jesus calls us to do. We are to care for the person wholly, a holistic approach, not just give them bread, not just give them the gospel, but give them everything that we've been given. Jesus has provided everything we need physically. He's provided everything we need spiritually. Why would we not give too? Jump ahead, verse 32. Jesus then said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." They said to him, "Sir, give us this bread always." Right? They said, "Hey, we want this." And Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst." It's an awesome picture of Jesus saying, "I am the answer to every need you have. I have healed your physical needs. I have helped that. I have fed you. I have given you food that you have eaten and your belly has been filled. But I am also the one who can even give you the greater gift as well. Put your faith and trust in me." The greatest need for everyone is ultimately spiritual, and Jesus is the answer to that. And so coming back to the question we had, how can I help? What can I do? What do I need to do to meet the needs of the world? And it simply comes down to be willing to give what you've been given. Are you willing to put what you have, whether you think it's nothing, whether you think it's insignificant, whether you think it's the greatest thing in the world, be willing to put whatever you've been given by God into the hands of Jesus to allow him to change the world. Do what you can. A little boy had a little lunch, and he said, "I know it can't do much in my hands, but if I give it to Jesus, it can do amazing things." For you, for me, what's that thing in our life that we've been saying, this is so small, God could never use this could never make a difference? Put it in the hands of Jesus. Quit trying to do it yourself and trust Jesus. Take the step of faith he's put in front of you to meet the needs of maybe one person, maybe the world. We'll never know unless we say, "God, this is what I have. I want you to use it." Are you willing to do that? Be willing to. What does that look like in your life? Talk with your small group if you haven't done that already. Like today, talk to your small group leader. Man, think through that. What can I do? What do I have? What's a tangible way that I can meet the needs of those around me, both physical and spiritual? And then act on it. Do that. They would love to help you in that. We love you. Have an awesome week.